Walk with me through the cellar door.
The storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. So tonight the audio may be a little different, and I will apologize for that. I am having to work remotely again for the 1 millionth time, and the unfortunate aspect is I forgot the cable to my microphone. So I have my equipment here, I have my laptop, I have it all set up, but I didn't have a bloody microphone cable. So you'll have to get past a little bit of the gritty voice on my side as I'm using my headset tonight to come to you. But we do have a great episode still that you'll be able to enjoy, because tonight we bring back one of our new hosts, Keith, Buddy the Lumberjack Spielman. How are you tonight, sir?
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And, you know, I'm sorry to hear that you're so sick that you lost your voice.
I lost my voice.
Your voice.
My voice. I did. We did lose Boyce tonight. He had other engagements for his work and his Yang Gang and all of that fancy
and
hoopla.
That is the type of comedy you can expect on this show now. Because that's what
true.
happens. That's what happens when I try to clean up my act, is I tell worse jokes. Yeah. So.
You do. Sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're just dumb.
Hashtag.
But you're Canadian, so. No,
I'm
nothing.
trying to take that one, so we're just gonna roll right along here.
Anyway, folks, tonight again, I'll apologize for the video or for the audio issues. It's me here. I've got some editing on my voice, but unfortunately, I just don't have my fancy microphone. But that doesn't mean that we still can't have a conversation. That me and Keith are going to talk quite a bit about Canada tonight, because we wanted to dedicate a whole episode to somebody other than Trump. Something other than the United States. I mean, there's hundreds of things going on. I mean, for Christ's sake, I don't know about you, buddy, but we here in America have to hear about Trump almost 24/7. We have to hear about people defending him 24/7. And at some point, it would be nice to talk about something not Trump for once.
I mean, I can only guarantee so much non-Trump talk, but I guess he didn't come up very often during this debate that I've got broken down. But yeah, so I've decided that since Chris has been kind enough to provide me this platform, I've heard enough of American politics, and it is now time to turn the tables and bore you with Canadian politics.
Now, hold on. Before we go too far into this, right? Let's set a little backdrop, right? So what is the reason that we want to come and talk about Canadian politics tonight?
Well, my original plan for tonight, because tomorrow, October 14th, is Canadian Thanksgiving, and I was originally planning on doing my Truth and Reconciliation episode in tandem with that, because there is controversy with Thanksgiving and its relationship to the Indigenous peoples. However, this is the last episode that we're doing before the Canadians actually go to the polls on October 21st. If you are a Canadian and you're listening, get out and vote. Seriously, we kind of need you to vote. This is a very important election. I have an idea of how it's going to go, but I end up wrong a lot, especially if you ask my wife.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. You're Canadian, so. No, that one didn't land either. That's the type of humor you get from drunk Chris at a hotel room.
You know, I'm trying so hard, because while we may not believe in karma, I still think there's an ironic sense of justice that goes on in our lives, and I don't want to throw too many Trump jabs at you, because we have somebody like Andrew Scheer, who is running in Canadian politics, and there's a disturbingly high chance he may end up as our next prime minister. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah.
And it may, and by may, I mean it will involve tears.
You know, the funny thing, too, is if you look at the lineup, right, for it, and we could talk about this because I think it's important, actually, to kind of set a backdrop for Canadian, essentially your political parties, right? So I think it's important to have that conversation. But the funny thing is you sent me this article and you wanted me to read through some of the different positions and all the different things that we could talk about it tonight. And on the top of the page, there is a woman, a white man, and I'm going to say a white woman, and a white man that looks like Bill Gates kind of mixed with, what's that senator from Ted Cruz? And then you have a sheik on there. And he's pretty cool. And then you have Justin Trudeau, the pretty boy. And so it's just kind of funny because you have a white woman, a white man, a sheik, and Justin Trudeau. And when you look at the pictures, they're all smiling except for him. He's giving you a kissy face. He's giving a kissy face in this picture. Who picked this picture?
It's nights like tonight that I wish Hannah could be here because I know he has a bit of a man crush on Trudeau. And if he were to see this picture, I imagine there would be a lot of bodily fluids escaping him. And to be fair, let's actually describe Andrew Scheer properly. I think he's what happens when the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man has sex with a thing of silly putty. I think that's what you get when that situation arises. And yes, you're right. The white woman, Elizabeth May, she is running for the Green Party. But we'll introduce all of the leaders in a couple of minutes here. So I guess I should kind of explain to you a little bit of the difference between how our prime minister is elected and the way your president is elected. I think that's only a little bit fair because we have a weird system in place too. It's just not as bad as the Electoral College.
You don't have Russian interference either, right? They don't care about your city or your country.
No. We're not really all that important. The only thing about Canada that really matters to the Russians is the fact that the North Pole is within our borders. So, I mean, Santa Claus is Canadian for the kids listening. But there's been a little bit of a dispute. But I mean, at the rate we're going, the North Pole is not going to last much longer anyways. It's just going to be, international waters. And that's a heartbreaking thought.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, let's not get into that because that's depressing as well, man. Like the whole climate change thing. We could be talking about that right now. But I just think that it's better that we talk Canadian politics because we talked a little bit about Greta the other day and like all of these changes that are happening. And it's for me, it's really sad because if you can't understand that climate change is happening. I mean, how about this? And here's a perfect example. You remember when you were recording, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but you're like, it's snowing outside, guys. It's snowing. And it's the beginning of October. That may have
been both weeks, actually.
So last week, I came up to Wisconsin on Monday, and it's like 70 to 80 degrees. By Thursday, it was in the 50s. That's serious. By the time I came back on Saturday, it was literally below 40 in the morning. It was horrible. And then I go back to Michigan, and it's only 10 degrees warmer. So it's the exact same thing, that we're getting the exact same thing. I mean, climates don't change that fast. That's not been a historical thing where we've historically had climates go that aggressive that quickly. And so, I won't say that that's climate change, right? But I'm saying that is some of the effects of what happens when we screw around with the planet's climate. And when all the experts are telling you, hey, folks, look at this. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, well, and that's part of the whole climate change thing is that there will be more drastic shifts, more intense aspects to the climate there. But we've got plenty of time to get depressed about the world being on fire, as Bill Nye puts it.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's talk Canadian politics then Keith or Buddy. I keep naming you wrong, but
as long as the listeners know that both Keith and Buddy are the same person, I think we're okay.
All right, buddy. Anyway,
Yeah, buddy.
yeah. Anyway, so let's talk Canadian politics. You know, there's an interest, and I find this interesting not just, and I guess I'll go on a little tangent here, but I don't find this like specifically interesting just because you're Canadian, right? I think it's interesting because when we start talking about politics outside of the U.S., and we've done that a little bit, I think, since you joined our show anyway, where we've had these conversations and we've talked through how politics work inside of Canada. I think it's very interesting to see the relationship dynamic. And it's kind of funny because sometimes I wonder if America is just the oddball out. I mean, we're the only one that doesn't really support the metric system, right? You know, I mean, we're a little out there. You know, I mean, and so we just, when we look at these different things, I think it's interesting to see what other countries are doing, because if we want to learn, right, if we want to make America great again, we can't just continue to repeat the same old crap over and over and over again. We actually need to make changes. And instead of me lecturing to everybody and saying they need to be progressive changes, they got to be left changes, blah, 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 we can actually talk about, let's look at other countries and what other countries are doing and seeing how we can help emulate some of what works inside of those countries in our own country.
Exactly. It helps when you try to learn how other people approach similar issues, because, as you said, doing the same thing over and over again, it's not going to change. Like, it's not going to get you a different result. I think there's a quote about somehow that's the definition of insanity. Which, yeah, no, we should. And I mean, the Canadian electoral system is not perfect. There's a lot of talk every couple of election cycles about reforming it, because the one thing that is the same between Canada and the United States is that it is possible to lose the popular vote and still lead the government. Now, there is a little bit of a difference. In Canada, we can have what's called a minority government, which basically means that the party that won does not control half of the seats in our parliament, so they can't pass anything with their party alone. They will continually get shot down by the opposition. If you're a majority government, you can pretty much do most of the things you want within legal realm. There's a lot more nuance to it that I'm not 100% sure on, but my honest prediction for the Canadian election is I do believe we will end up with a minority government, and it's not the minority government that I want. But
so why do you feel that you're going to end up with a minority government, though? I mean, what's the draw behind that?
I was looking at the polls, and you know, we have 6 big parties. However, we also have individuals running for seats. They wouldn't be prime minister. However, they could still occupy seats in our parliament. But the reason why I think it is likely to be a minority government is because 2/3 of our vote alone, according to the polls that I was looking at the CBC website, 2/3 is split perfectly between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau. So that's 1/3 of the vote goes to each of those parties, and then the other third is divvied up among the other 4 parties and independents. And if that's representative of how Parliament would look after the election, that would mean whichever of the Liberals or Conservatives eked out more seats, they would be the minority government. They would still have the Prime Minister, but
So let's relate it back to American politics for a second. And I'm very I don't want to say this way, but it would be kind of almost like the House of Representatives went to the Democrats, the Senate goes to the Conservatives, and then we ended up with like a Libertarian or a Green Party president. Is that kind of how that would be similar?
No. The Senate of Canada is something that I'm still not fully informed on, to be honest. In my full admission, it's only been in the last year that I've started fully immersing myself in the politics of my own country, and there is a lot to learn. There is a lot of nuance. our Senate operates in a different faculty than your Senate. I would have to go off the Wikipedia
okay, but
here, but
in terms of how the split would happen, at
right.
least you can say that would be like the same type of a split.
I don't think it would be as drastic. I'm just trying to find a quick explanation for it so I don't sound like such a babbling fool on the subject. Crimey. Senators. I believe our Senate is more appointed. Like, our Senate is a lot smaller than our Parliament. Our Parliament is made up of the seats that are based upon the ridings. So you have to win in your riding to get your seat, and that's part of the electoral system that I'll be talking about in a little bit here. The Senate can reject bills passed in the House of Commons, the Parliament. But that's...
So you don't know. That's what you're telling me.
No, I'm trying to
come
up with a quickie explanation, but there's a lot of nuance that goes into it, so I can't really fully explain that. But I guess that's a topic for another episode later. And Keith learns about the Senate. But I can tell you about our electoral system, which is first past the post. I don't know if you've heard about it. Based off of the countries that operate with this voting system, I'm going to say it's kind of like the metric system, the metric voting system, whereas the Electoral College is the imperial voting system, and only the Americans really use that. So in the first past the post, we have our ridings, which are almost similar to what do you guys have, like electoral votes, I guess, for your Electoral College?
Yeah, so what we do is we go and vote, and we vote in different elections, and then we have an Electoral College where they're elected, right? So, if Michigan goes Democrat, we have elected officials that go and vote Democrat. That's essentially, that's the long and short of it. I mean, there's a lot more nuance to it, but essentially that's what it is. So, your Electoral College, they could change, but for the most part, they almost always vote, whatever the majority votes. So in California, you get so many votes per your population. And then what they do is it's supposed to be equated to exactly however many votes, you would have. So if you have like 700,000 people in, let's say, Nebraska, and you have 15 million in California, they will ration the votes not based on the set population, because if you did a majority vote, obviously California would outrule almost every other state.
Yep.
And so that's why you have the Electoral College to help try and balance some of that out. And we've talked about that. Hannah and I talked about that before a little bit, to say, should the Electoral College be revamped? Should we dump it? What are the other options? And that type of thing. Because in fairness, now where we're at in society today, it doesn't always lend to the most accurate or the most correct way of representing the majority of society.
Yeah, as we've seen. Okay, so in our electoral system, we have a riding, and you represent. They're sort of based off of populations. However, because we do have very densely populated areas such as Toronto, a lot of votes, a lot of our election can be decided by Ontario and Quebec alone, which is a very big bone of contention out west, because we have British Columbia, which is traditionally, left of center, so they're more liberal, more NDP, and then all of a sudden you have you literally go across a provincial line. You go down the mountains into Alberta and Saskatchewan, and you have a lot of conservative support. And so that basically means that the West is perpetually kind of divided, and there's a lot of infighting because we get mad, or Albertans will get upset that, British Columbia isn't supporting Alberta's best interest, and British Columbia is upset that Alberta isn't supporting British Columbia's best interest, because a lot of British Columbia is focused on preserving their natural parks. It's a very mountainous area. They got the Rocky Mountains. So there's a lot of protected ecosystems and, yes, natural resources going on in there as well. So back up to first past the post here. So everybody in that specific riding votes for a candidate. Now, the 6 main parties do have candidates, from what I understand, in pretty much every single riding. However, if you run as an independent and you win in that riding, then you still get that seat in Parliament. You represent that specific riding. You can vote however you feel is best representing your specific riding once you're in the Parliament. A funny thing is that the Prime Minister the party leader could actually not win in their riding. And this has happened before, where the leader of the party didn't win in their riding. So what happens in that case is somebody who did win in their riding gives up their seat to the Prime Minister, so the leader can go and lead. Now, first past the post, it's not perfect. You could have a vast majority of the seats and barely have 50% of the popular vote. And that's simply because you only need to beat out the other people. As I was saying earlier, we could have, I am hoping, worst case scenario, it's a minority government, but it could very well turn into a conservative majority, and they don't even have half of the votes, yet they're controlling a majority of the seats.
So how does that happen? I'm a little confused. If you have the minority, how are they controlling the majority?
Oh, sorry. So I threw that in as an aside there. So you could only have 50% of the vote, but you could still have a majority of the seats simply because you won enough seats, and you only have to beat your opponents in your ridings by a specific margin. It is one of the biggest criticisms of our voting system. It also, another major criticism that I've seen is apparently there's a lot of wasted votes, or votes for losing candidates or whatever. And there's kind of a feeling of, if you know that you live in an area that typically votes one way, your vote pretty much counts for nothing overall, because your vote only counts towards your riding, not the popular vote. It's part of the popular vote, but that doesn't play any role. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think we had that in the U.S. too. Yeah. If you think about it, technically Hillary won the popular vote, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean anything to anybody.
Well, there's no technically about it. She did.
Yeah, she did, but technically it means nothing to anybody, except for maybe me, who can feel better that there's more people that like her than Trump. But,
yeah.
But it's the same thing.
Yeah. And especially that is one of the drawbacks to having the potential for so many different candidates in a riding. So a funny little anecdote. Years ago, I worked at the election. I was the polling officer. So I went to the office in Calgary. I grabbed all of our ballots. I grabbed the voting box, all the security measures, whatnot. I prepared it, took it to the polls the next day. I, had my list of people who lived in that riding based off their name. So we'll have different sections based off of your name, alphabetical order, and all of that. I'm sure that's not uncommon. And I would count up the votes at the end of the night for my specific ballot box, close it up, take it back. And the night before, I was just kind of curious. I didn't know who all was running in my riding, and I saw a name that I had never seen. And he was running for this small party that, again, never even heard of. Turns out it was an actual right-wing extremist neo-Nazi party was running. he got 3 votes in my box, and I was just kind of blown away. I was like, that's 3 more than I thought he might get. But we do actually even have like a small communist party, but because it's not one of the big 6 parties, which we'll get into shortly, they really don't make a difference. Independents don't throw off the vote quite as much, which is, I guess, all right. It just, but it does allow for a change of power and for new parties to garner support, and which is what I believe I've seen a lot happen with our Green Party.
Yeah, and in America, the Green Party's there, but they're not very powerful.
Because I remember when Trump got that night, there was a lot of people who were upset about people voting for, was it Jill Stein who was the Green Party for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot, and people saying, well, how can you vote for Jill Stein, like knowing that you're basically throwing your vote away? Do you not support women? But that was a lot. That made for a lot of fun podcasts to listen to, I'll admit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It depends, because I think there's some contention among Americans, and some people actually believe that Jill Stein helped lose the Clinton vote, and I don't know if I'm sold on that. Hannah and I did an episode, and I'd have to honestly go back and look at all the numbers. Honestly, we'd have to go back and actually look at the numbers from way back when to see if that's true or not. Now everybody, I got a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters saying, yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is. That's what lost us. And I'm saying, technically speaking, maybe that is what lost a few states, and maybe those few states would have swung and fixed, the election. But at the exact same time, there's a lot of other things that lost this election too. That's not the only reason behind it.
Yeah, that was one of those debates where there were so many small things that just built up into this great big mountain of shit.
Exactly.
You can't really hang your hat on one, although there are bigger factors that you can point to. The whole butter emails thing, that was always fun.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing now is they could say that all they want, but look at Trump and his emails.
Ivanka was doing the exact same thing, and they're like, no, it's fine.
Yep.
But, I guess when you're dear leader, it doesn't matter if you're criticizing somebody for something and then doing that said thing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So let's move on to Canadian politics, right? And let's look at your different parties. How about that? I think that's a good comparison right there.
Absolutely. Okay. So I'm not really sure where to place one of these parties, so I'm going to kind of leave them in limbo, and I'll talk more about them in the debate and why I'm really unsure about where to place them on the political spectrum. So I'm going to focus on 5 of the 6 main political parties for now. So those 5 are the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the New Democrat or NDP, the Green Party, and the People's Party of Canada or PPC. So we have the Liberal Party, which typically is right. It's supposed to be like right in the middle. They do lean a little more right. In Canada, they have historically leaned a little bit more to the right. The Conservative Party is just a little bit further right than Liberal, although in terms of policy, they do tend to run fairly parallel to each other. The Liberal Party now just has more of a left bend because our Conservative Party has, by virtue of extreme politics, shifted a little bit to the right. And then even further right on our Libertarian Party is the PPC. And then we'll now make our way back to the left. So just left of center, or historically just left of center, probably a little bit further now, is the NDP, the New Democrat Party. They're, everybody who's anti-socialist without actually knowing what socialism is they're like, oh, that's the new socialist party, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the even further left party, although I can't really say how much further left they are because policy-wise, I don't see as much of a difference. I just see more of a solid footing, and that would be the Green Party. So they're very far left. During the debate that I'm going to be breaking down shortly, I'll be talking about how Elizabeth May, who leads the Green Party, spent a lot of time focusing on climate change and the need for it. And she actually impressed me, even though I don't think she's going to win more than one, maybe two seats at most, because I don't think they've ever held more seats than that in our parliament.
And so that's similar to America. We except for they don't get any seats.
Right. Yeah, they don't even get a shot at the presidency. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. But on the opposite side, they can win more local elections. But we see it more from our Libertarian Party than we do from the Green Party, honestly.
Actually, that is a really good point right there. So in Canada, over my lifetime anyways, I have seen it's been more of a rivalry between our conservative and liberal parties. They've always led all the elections on the federal front. But provincially, you'll see a lot more of a lot more diversity of the parties. Quebec, they have the Bloc Québécois, who for a little while didn't really have a lot of power, and now all of a sudden they have more power again. Alberta had 4 years of NDP, which, as I said, a lot further left, and now we're back to conservative, which is not great. And as with the way your what the hell do you call them? The senators that you or the what do you call the person who leads your state?
Governor.
Okay. So while you're in the, your governor may be part of the Democratic Party, but if they're in, the Bible Belt, their policies that they're going for might not exactly reflect what the Democratic Party does at say the federal level, which is the same for Canadian provinces. I mean, the NDP, when they were in, there was a little bit more of a push for a pipeline, just to try to get Albertans back to work, that type of thing.
Yeah, and the way our state works is we get certain liabilities, and if you kind of look at how the federal government works versus state governments, a lot of times state governments are like precursors to what's going to be happening at the federal level. So, I would be surprised if marijuana was legalized here shortly. And I don't say that because people actually believe in it specifically at a federal level, but I see it as because a lot of the states have spent a lot of time legalizing it, and they're doing more than just recreational, right? You have the medical side, you have the recreational side, you have both sides of that whole thing. States are up in the air. How do we bank for this? Banks are technically federal. I mean, it's a big cluster F, all the way around. But if enough states actually certify this, essentially the federal government will take notice, and then they'll put it out for a national vote, and they'll either declassify it, they'll do something.
Interesting.
But if you look characteristically at the states and how the states run, that's a lot of time what happens. Again, same thing with gay marriage. Look what happened with that. You had several states certify it, a lot more went around, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, we have legalized gay marriage. Thanks, Obama.
Thanks, Obama.
Sorry.
No. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. Actually, I was on vacation when that happened. So as soon as I had internet access, all of a sudden I'm seeing all of this about gay marriage being legalized in the States. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, oh, that's just happened? Because I didn't know that you guys were lagging that far behind on that front, at least at a federal level, because I believe in Canada it was fully legalized in the early 2000s. And let me
Yeah. That I don't know when you guys legalized it, but yes, America has been arguing over people's human rights.
Oh, this is not something to be totally proud of, but we did it about 10 years earlier. July 20th, 2005, same-sex marriage in Canada became legal. So
there you go.
That's fun.
Yeah. So it's just, if you look at the way the states work around here, is that's typically how things happen. And again, I'll go back to the marijuana thing only because I know a lot about it. Because I did a lot of volunteer work and different things like that with different organizations. But the way we got it on the ballot is there's like a national organization that comes in and does surveys. They do a lot of statistical analysis, and they kind of look at the different areas to see if Michigan would actually be able to pass it. And they do an analysis not just like on, do Michiganders want it? They look at different areas in Michigan that have the higher concentrated amount of votes. And that's how they make their determination. And then, so this company comes in and does these different things, and they have them for other initiatives as well. But, the marijuana thing's been a big one, and that's how it got passed in Colorado. The exact same company that helped Colorado came to Michigan, did the same bloody thing, And, they won't certify and tell states to even put it on ballots until they hit over like 60 or 70%, which is why you see a lot of medical first before you see recreational, because people believe woo-woo knowledge that marijuana cures everything.
Wait, it doesn't?
No.
It doesn't cure cancer? What?
At least not yet. Maybe in the future, in some special world, it will. But as of now, it does not. And maybe it does, and we just don't know it. I don't know. But I can tell you that the science has not determined that yet. And so I'm not going to trust it. And but I do know from personal effects, it does help people that do have cancer. And I knew a child that died of cancer that took copious amounts of marijuana, and it did not save her. So,
oh dear.
Anyway, we're distracted from Canadian politics.
Because we don't want to get depressed. Yeah. Well, shall we get into the meat of what I've brought to the table? The meat of my Canadian Thanksgiving dinner.
So I gotta ask a weird side question. Do you guys talk politics at Canadian Thanksgiving?
It depends on the family. My family, we have a very strict no politics policy. We have specific members of my family who they believe that being the loudest voice means you win every discussion, and it can very easily turn into shouting matches. Because as I've openly admitted before, I come from a family that is typically fairly conservative. There's been a shift amongst a few of my family members, but there is some key players that will not budge because of party loyalty and this belief that anything that might be misconstrued as socialism equals Satan. I have, just as an example, I used to parrot a lot of these talking points. I used to parrot a lot of the garbage that comes out of climate change deniers, people who are anti any sort of taxes and anti-social welfare, things like that. I used to parrot a lot of that garbage, and it wasn't exactly the happiest time of my life, to be honest. I've grown, I'd like to think. Sorry, I completely lost my train of thought there. God, ADD medication needs to start lasting longer, I tell you. I was talking about being a conservative and leaving that. Oh, right. Okay. So I've kind of learned, because I followed how I left and shed a lot of those beliefs. And admittedly, it's why I do tend to not engage in conversations where people talk about, dealing with the other side, is because I have a very different perspective. I come from the other side. But anyways, is like things like global warming. I cannot be brought up around my family because instantly it'll be shut down. It'll be called a scam, things like that. But I have found that instead of using a great big buzzword like that, and this is a trick for anybody who has to deal with climate change deniers in their own family, at their own Thanksgiving dinner or family dinners, don't bother with the overall global warming thing in dealing with them. using the buzzword is just going to create this knee-jerk response, and you're wrong. But I did make headway in a discussion about Arctic ice and the difference between the sea ice and the land ice. Because at the time there was more sea ice, and all I had to do was say, yeah, but the interesting thing about the science behind that is that because of the salt water has I think it's a lower freezing temperature, all the runoff from the land ice, there's no salt in it, so it's basically like fresh water. So that's why it's all of a sudden we're seeing extra ice on the seas because of this water that freezes easier. But once it starts to, wash away, then there's going to be a lot less sea ice. And I actually made a little bit of headway, so there's hope, folks. We just got to know what buzzwords to not focus on. And thank you for bearing with me as I lost my train of thought and then jumped back on it.
Anyway. So
yes,
you have how many different sects of politics, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, that's the wrong way to say that. You have different political parties, right?
Right.
And they each have different opinions. And you had me read this whole article how they all differ, right?
Yep.
And I think it kind of goes into the debate that you wanted to talk about. And I'll be honest, I watched some of your debate, or not your debate, but some of the debate. So I have a little bit of a knowledge of how the debate is. I'll be honest, it was a little boring compared to American standards. There wasn't enough punching down, technically.
Then you did not watch a lot of the debate.
Yeah, but you guys do things like nice. It's like I watch South Park, and South Park teaches me Canadians are nice. And like you could tell somebody to go fuck themselves very nicely, like fuck you, buddy. And it's like hold on, are you insulting me? Or are you telling me I don't understand? Like I'm confused.
I would just like to point out to the listeners that you were the first one to drop the F word. I'm just gonna say, I haven't said it once. I'm actually working on trying to behave because I know your show doesn't have the explicit tag that mine did.
You're right. You're right. But it's kind of funny if you look at it, Keith. Right?
Yep.
When you look at the difference between the two politics, it's harder to understand sometimes where you're at versus where Americans are at to some extent.
Right. Well, on that vein, the big difference between the Canadian federal leaders debate and the American presidential debate is the presidential debate has 2, and the Canadian debate has 6. And not only do we have the main debate that I'm going to be going over, but a few nights later, we had a French debate because in order to be prime minister, you do have to be fluent in French. You have to be bilingual, as Canada is a bilingual country. Our 2 national languages are English and French. Although if you listen to a Quebecer speak French, it's not exactly the same as what you'd hear out of France. Just a side note.
Which is funny because Trump's never made fun of that. So nobody would know that unless
I don't think he's smart enough to understand the difference between a dialect and a language or regional differences.
Yeah, I would assume so. And look at it this way, right? When you look at it this way, Trump calls people nicknames that are horrible, like Sleepy Eye Joe, like those type of weird things. You don't hear a lot of that in Canadian politics at all.
No,
really.
No. To be honest, and this is something that I made a note of from the debate, was they would say, like Mr. Scheer, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Bernier. There was 2 instances. The first was Jagmeet Singh, who is he is to me what Bernie Sanders was to Hannah, almost. I wish he could win. I wish he were more electable to the masses because Canada has this weird issue with federally supporting the NDP. He's kind of like a sweet young chocolate Bernie Sanders to me almost. Caramel. I think caramel would be a better way because I love caramel. And then he called Trudeau and Scheer Mr. Delay and Mr. Deny outright on the debate about climate. And at one point, Elizabeth May, she had some savage moments in this. And she actually had a moment where I was like, I might be more supportive of you than I ever thought possible. But we can talk about that. That was near the end of the debate. She didn't call Scheer Mr. Scheer. She flat out called him Andrew. And she did that specifically because he was being childish. And I wish I had made a note of it, but I didn't. And that was just basically her way of saying, you're a kid at the adults table. And as you'll find out from my personal take on the debate, Scheer is really not much more than a child trying to sit at the adults table of this debate.
Well, I think that's similar to American politics. We have some of those in the Democratic Party too.
Thankfully Scheer is on the conservative side, which makes it easier to rain on him. So before I get into talking about the debate, there is one thing that comes up a little bit during the debate, and instead of trying to explain it and making it a full side, I'm just going to put it out there now because I do believe it actually has made a little bit of news outside of Canada, and it's called Bill 21. It's in Quebec, because Quebec has typically been a very isolationist, almost like trying to be their own sovereign nation for quite a bit of time. Excuse me. And they recently put into place Bill 21 on June 16th. Bill 21 was put through. Now, what this is, and I actually found the legislature, the writings on it, so I could make sure that I wasn't just making up nonsense about it, like Peterson does when it comes to talking about gender identity, but that's its own thing. So the persons listed as civil servants or anyone working in any capacity with the public sector are now in Quebec prohibited from wearing religious symbols in the exercise of their function. So in this legislature, it's defined. The religious symbol is defined as any object, including clothing, a symbol, jewelry, an adornment, an accessory or headwear that is worn in connection with a religious conviction or belief, or is reasonably considered as referring to a religious affiliation. So Immigration Minister Simon Jolin Barrette said all religious symbols, regardless of the size of the object, would be prohibited, except with a couple. There are a few small exceptions. One of them being religious tattoos or hairstyles such as Rastafarian dreadlocks. I don't know how many of them are in Quebec, but apparently there's enough that they needed to mention them specifically. So the law affects any public employee who carries a weapon, including police officers, courthouse constables, bodyguards, prison guards, wildlife officers, crown prosecutors, government lawyers and judges, school principals, vice principals, and teachers. Now, there is a grandfather clause with some exemption, providing that they hold the same job at the same institution. But all in all, if you work for the government in Quebec, you cannot wear a religious symbol. And that's been hotly debated across Canada. It's been seen as a violation of freedom of expression, which is understandable. Quebec has hotly resisted bilingualism and tried to make it so that to be there you have to speak French. And going there, if you don't speak French, all depending on where you are, people may not even acknowledge your existence. However, that said, if you're speaking French in other places of Canada, you might receive worse treatment, because there's an Anglophone, Francophone battle that apparently needs to exist. So having explained that, when I bring up Bill 21, that's what I'm referring to, because it is actually a specific question later on in the debate. So in this six-ring circus, the hexagon here, are you ready to find out who's in which corner?
I am. Bring it on, baby.
All right. Fighting for the Liberal Party is leader Justin Trudeau. You all know him as the handsome gentleman who messed with Trump's love of trying to pull people in and dominate them with their handshakes. After that, we have fighting for the Conservative Party, Andrew Scheer. Anyways, the New Democrats have Jagmeet Singh, a sweet, beautiful man. The Green Party has Elizabeth May, the only woman on the panel. For the People's Party of Canada, we have Maxime Bernier. He is from Quebec, and I apologize if I do a derogatory French accent while talking about his points. He said some very interesting things. And then the last leader, the last corner, we have the Bloc Québécois being represented by Yves-François Blanchet. Now, just as a little explanation, the Bloc Québécois never has a riding outside of the province of Quebec. I'm not sure why this has continued, but basically this has been an ongoing thing. Bloc Québécois typically does maintain a lot of seats from Quebec. They do fight a lot for Quebec's specific interests. As I've mentioned, there is some separationist sentiment, which does actually come up a little bit later on in the debate. Now, the debate format, it was divided up into 5 specific sections, and under each section there would be questions. Sometimes there would be an open debate. Other times there would just be one leader who was put on the spot, and everybody got to debate them. It was a different format. In my defense, this is the first debate I've actually sat and watched through, and this experience has made it so I kind of want to do it again, because it was interesting to see the dynamic. And I'll be honest, there were some moments where I had to pause the debate because I was laughing so damn hard at what was going on, because there were just some savage mic drops. And the moderator, there actually ended up being a different moderator for each of the specific sections. So, Tanner, you ready?
I am.
Okay. So the first section that they had for the debate was leadership in Canada and the world. And the first question, which went out to all the leaders, was many Canadians have felt the implications of a divided world, more so than in 2015, from U.S. protectionism to Brexit to our growing tensions with China. As Prime Minister, how would you effectively defend both the interests and values of Canadians on the world stage? What I did was I tried to make some notes based off of what they said, focusing on their points, and I'd have my own side commentary if I felt there was something relevant to say. Just trying to summarize their stance, because I felt it was a much better way of representing their platform, and also because the Conservative Party hadn't even released part of their economic platform. Their budget had not been released up until about 2 days ago.
That's like a Trump thing.
And this, actually, a leader that I have mentioned, the very first time I started doing my Canadian segment, I was talking about Doug Ford, the brother of the crack-smoking mayor, did the same thing in Ontario. He waited until the last minute. Now, we could talk about the strategy behind that, but that would be another conversation for another time. So for the question that I mentioned, how would you defend the interests and values of Canadians on the world stage? Trudeau aggravated me because he really didn't say anything. He just brought up protecting the environment to ensure the future. After him was Scheer, who said it's important as Prime Minister, he and his party always wanted to stand up for Canada, promote free trade. And this is where I started to really develop a deep sense of, or a deep loss of respect for the Conservative Party, because almost everything Andrew Scheer said was an attack at Justin Trudeau. And that was basically his entire argument. Well, Justin Trudeau, he did this, he did that. And it was just, that was literally all he did here, is he says Justin Trudeau only pretends to stand up for Canada. Said Justin Trudeau can't even remember how many times he put the blackface on. All he did was crap on Trudeau, called him a phony and a fraud. He literally said nothing of substance in his response here. He just went on the attack at Trudeau.
Sounds like Trump.
Yeah, I think it's the modern state of conservative politics, and it's really disappointing.
Yeah, which is funny because, I'll be honest, when I hear that question, the first thing I want to say is, how do we protect Canadian interests in the same way you would say, how do we protect American interests? And the difference is we look at, we need to be able to defend our country, our state to some extent. We need to be able to ensure free trade. Mm-hmm. But at the exact same time, in reality, it's very small-minded. We in America, we have that. It's a small-mindedness, and that's what drives me nuts about American politics. A lot of it's small-minded discussions. When we have such a larger issue worldwide, nobody wants to address it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all about me, which is kind of like the capitalist mantra, isn't it? So after Scheer spoke, we have Singh, who said part of his platform would be, standing up to Trump and powerful, wealthy corporate interests. A strong part of his platform actually was about cutting corporate welfare. Elizabeth
He got my
May,
vote right there.
Oh, I know. Oh, I'm not even kidding you. Like, I wanted to hug this man and kiss his face and rub my chin through his beard, but that's
hey, my beard's almost as big. You can do that to my beard too.
Yeah, but you're not him. It's just not the same. So Elizabeth May, she actually opened up with, and the reason why I highlighted this is because it relates to my last segment. She opened up by acknowledging that the land they stood on was had historically belonged to the Algonquin peoples. What she wanted to promote from her platform was an idea of sustainable development, encouraging women and girls, and renegotiating the World Trade Order. Is that what I wrote? Is that really what I wrote? Man, I should not have done that work. Blanchette of the Québécois, he had mentioned how farmers have paid the price, and then he made a comment, and I had to quote this. He said, "Don't try to show biceps with China if you have tiny biceps," in response to this idea of a trade war. Yeah, it's great. And although I don't support him, Bernier was one of my favorites of the debate because he was a broken record, but he said some amazing things that I sat there and I went, oh my goodness. And you're about to find out. So almost every statement he made led with some attack or promoting about how his party was the best party to work in the interests of Canadians. He goes, "We are the only party that is pro-Canada. Everybody else is a globalist and wants to give your money to everybody from China to Africa. The UN is bad. And we are the only party with a foreign policy that is based on security and the prosperity of Canada." So Trump, but with a French accent and actually better English, even though Bernier is not, English isn't his first language.
I mean, because he's not saying, and Sleepy Joe, and we got to make America better because of Sleepy Joe, because I didn't do anything wrong, and that type of thing, So at least he was he sounded mentally stable.
Well, until we got to the second question.
Oh no! Seriously, there's a second question.
Yeah. So under each topic, there was 3 or 4 questions. So the second question under leadership, it was directed at Maxime Bernier. Now, when we talked about Greta Thunberg coming to Canada, you may recall that I mentioned a specific party leader tweeting about her. Well, it was Maxime Bernier. So the question directed basically could be paraphrased as, the words that you tweeted out, are these the words of somebody with the character and integrity to lead all Canadians and represent us on the world stage? I actually made so many notes about what Bernier responded to this with. He said, you have to tell the truth to the Canadians in order to be their leader. And he went off to say that, yes, this country is diverse and we must be proud, but we don't need legislation to tell us who we are. He said we need fewer immigrants in our country, that we don't want our country to turn out like European countries where they have huge difficulties integrating all of their immigrants, and that he is a proud Canadian and the only one who wants to have a discussion, an open and honest discussion about immigration. Then he did some anti-social. Oh, it's glorious. Every rant this man has is just gold. He does some incoherent anti-socialism rambling, and I'm not kidding when I say it was an incoherent. The only word that I understood because of the way he was speaking was something about socialism being bad. He said socialist policies cannot create wealth, and he says that believing that we need fewer immigrants isn't racist. and that 49% of Canadians are the majority of Canadians now. Yeah. And then the last note that I made is that he said, because the Canadians always celebrate their diversity, we can celebrate it and we should celebrate it, but it's not who we are. Which kind of like, I had to pause at this moment because I'm sitting there and I'm like, my brain blinked. My brain literally blinked, even though it is well known that the part of the Canadian identity is diversity, and it's a very strong part. You take we're what's called the cultural mosaic, as opposed to like the melting pot, which kind of requires assimilation. The mosaic says, come here, just do your thing, just respect our laws.
Which is insane because America thrives on the melting pot ideology. But here, your guy, and here you have somebody going, "Hey, it worked for America. Maybe we should do it."
Yeah, it's worked out great. So after that, we have Trudeau, who was talking about how fear of the other that Bernier is harping on is a great currency for people who want to strike up anxieties and get people to vote against things. And because of our diversity, he says we get to redefine what it means to be Canadian like every day. But then this is Trudeau's great mic drop. Is he looked and he says, Bernier's role on this stage seems to be to say publicly what Mr. Scheer thinks privately. And that was just a total mic drop. So at this stage, it was a one-on-one debate. So each of the leaders, after Bernier had his tirade, each of the leaders engaged him individually for about a minute. So Scheer, with his time, he said, you can be proud of the Canadian identity while welcoming people from all around the world. What that means, I have no idea. But of the minute, it took Bernier about 5 seconds to start talking over Scheer. And I really didn't want to give any Scheer any credit, but it was really funny because Scheer looked at him and was saying, like, he called out Bernier for spouting nonsense, for likes and retweets from the darkest parts of Twitter, and that Bernier can celebrate Canada's strength of diversity without insulting people. And I'm going to call Scheer a broken clock because every once in a while he says something that I'm like, okay, that's not something I fully disagree with, which I think, broken clock, they're right once in a while. Singh went on to point out
I
that,
agree. Look at Trump. Trump did the same thing. He signed an autism bill to fund autistic research and help for, parents that have autistic children. He didn't create the bill, but he re-signed it. So, at least give him that credit.
Yep, exactly. Singh very, very eloquently just said, Bernier, all you had to do was admit that you were wrong, apologize, and you could move on. But leaders do not divide. They bridge people, they bring them together. And then he talks about how historic tax cuts for the wealthy have been problematic. And I made a note at this point saying that, Singh had just over a minute to respond. But most of his time trying to talk was lost because Bernier just would not stop trying to talk over him. And it was really difficult to discern because you've got two people talking at once and the closed captioning can't pick it up. And I can't really discern a lot of what's being said because it's just a jumbled mess, and it was really aggravating. May's criticism of Bernier came by saying that leadership, it's a public service. It's not a right. It's something that is a public service. You are providing a service of leadership to the people. And her biggest issue that she did go back to a fair bit was, saying climate change is the single biggest economic opportunity in a generation, which, I agree with. And I have to comment here because I'm going to bring up Blanchette. Blanchette was one of my favorites in the entire debate, even though because right from the get-go, he said, I'm not going to be the prime minister. And he made it very clear that he had so few shits to give that his main role was to just call people out on their bullshit. And it was great. because he made some really great points. Now he did lean a lot left, but being representing Quebec primarily is difficult to discern where that would fall on the political spectrum. So in his response to Bernier here, Blanchette said, somebody invoking the truth should not be somebody who denies climate change, because Bernier vehemently denies that climate change is the thing. He also called Bernier out on the socialism thing, saying, that argument, it comes too easy. He says immigration is not about a number, but it's about the resources that we invest in welcoming that number with a desire to share our language, our values. And that's not accomplished with a message that, they're not wanted, that their presence here is not really desirable. And he also pointed out that, we're all immigrants. We're all the descendants of immigrants, which I thought was a very nice little mic drop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, exactly. Yeah, it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear when they go out of their way to say, "Hey, we're not the only ones here." I mean, and I don't think we get that in America very often. So, when you hear it in other countries' politics, it's kind of nice to hear. And the difference is, it's kind of funny because you guys up there, your team up there in Canada, we'll call them the Canadian team, right? They have
the gold medal team.
The gold medal team, yeah. You're the best hockey. You're the hockey's the best there. Nobody has better hockey than Canada. But, all right, that's not true. But anyway, so when you look
Russia.
at it, when you stop, you're gonna fuck this whole episode up. But when you look at it though, and you actually dissect it, the amount of parties you have that are actually running for a main seat, that are getting a main stage, that are getting extra time. I mean, in America, if you mention Joe Biden's name, you have to give him time to talk every time.
Yeah.
In Canada, it doesn't seem like that same, tit for tat. And there seems to be a larger amount of diversity in the opinions than we've gotten before, at least in America.
And it wasn't perfectly laid out, like when they had the open debate. There were a lot of times when the moderator did have to step in and be like, one person talking at a time, we can't understand a word you're saying. But the chance for a lot of different one-on-one debates, I thought that provided a lot of opportunity for us to see how the leaders would interact with each other, how their policies clashed, that type of thing. And it was really interesting. And yeah, as you said, we didn't just say every time you mention this person, they get an extra 30 seconds to talk. Because let me tell you, if that were the case, Trudeau would have had an extra hour and a half to talk, because almost everybody made a point of calling him out on something.
Yeah, and is it just because he is the current prime minister? Is that why? I mean, is it the same way as everybody looks at Biden and go, in the Democratic Party, but everybody's like, well, Biden's got to be the top runner. He's going to be the one that the DNC selects, yada yada yada. And it's it's the same with Trudeau. Is it because he is the prime minister? He's done fairly well in the populist opinion. Is he going to be? Is that why people want to mention him?
That is a big thing. I mean, obviously, because you're punching up, you're going to spend a lot of time focusing on him and their policies and why what they said in their election promises didn't match up with a lot of what they did. And it did happen a fair bit. And I mean, I'm not going to say it shouldn't happen. I think it's fair that a leader has to be held accountable. But it did, after a while, start to turn out like a broken record.
Yeah. And I think you get that, man. I think you get that no matter where you're at. I mean, everybody wanted to bash Trump at the Democratic debates, but I'll be honest. I don't need you to bash Trump. I don't need any candidate to tell me how horrible Trump is. What I need, and seriously, what I need is give me a platform, tell me what you're going to accomplish, and explain to me how you're going to accomplish that if you don't have both the House and the Senate. Explain that to me. That's what I want to know. And my wife would tell you, she's going to say, her and I have, we pretty much for the most part align politically, on her beliefs. I'm a little bit more radical than she is. I'm a Nazi puncher. She's not quite on the Nazi punching verge of things. You know, like she wants them to be silenced, but she doesn't know if violence is the answer, right? Hippy dippy stuff. But at the exact same time, though, you know, like in terms of presidential candidates and who we're going to vote for in the Democratic primaries, we're both very closely aligned. But the difference becomes is that she will be happy to support a more moderate or semi-moderate, we call them neocon candidate, and feel a lot better about it than I do in when it runs against Trump, for the pure fact that she does actually want everybody to have a voice, and that unless the far left in America is going to be like the true voice of the left, they shouldn't get the say in everything. You know, which is why like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are very close competitors, but at the exact same time, when we look at what's truly probably the best for all Democratic voters, they don't hit every single cylinder for every Democratic voter out there. You know,
and that's fair. That's fair. I mean, there are always. I mean, we're different people, so we're always going to have some issue to take, and that's totally cool. That's totes fine. It's just a matter of, you know, which person more aligns with your value system.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And that's the thing, you know, it's funny in Canada, it seems like everybody wants to punch at Trudeau, but to some extent, I mean, he's not the super liberal. I mean, he's liberal in some aspects, but he's not like the far leftist person in your debates.
He does take a little bit more of a centrist, although there were several times where he was accused of being more of a conservative than Scheer. I mean, at one point, Bernier, the libertarian candidate, looked at Scheer in his chance to single out one leader and ask them a specific question. He looked at Scheer and said, you know, you call yourself a conservative, but I see you aligning more with liberal values. So how can you call yourself a conservative? And that was my favorite role of Bernier's, was he antagonized Scheer a fair bit, made Scheer very uncomfortable. And it was quite obvious in his body language. This was just a quick analysis of body language that I noted about Scheer. So Scheer's entire campaign has been based off of, well, Trudeau did this. Well, Trudeau did that. Well, Trudeau is horrible. Trudeau this, Trudeau that. Every time he steps up, it seems that he has to attack Trudeau. And that's pretty much all his party has run on a platform of is, well, Trudeau sucks. And I'll give you my summary, and that's pretty much it. But, you know, and this is just like all he's been able to run on. And it's just been incredibly frustrating because, again, like they just released part of their platform the other day, so close to the end of the election. So it wouldn't really get a lot of time for them to have to be scrutinized. But he did waffle at times. And I mean, as I was saying about his body language, is he when his one-on-one with Trudeau, the moderator introduced and said, you know, Mr. Scheer, you get to pick one leader and ask them any question of your choosing. And this did get a lot of laughs, and admittedly it was kind of funny to see, but also it was very expected, was when as soon as he was given the opportunity to pick one leader, he literally stood on his heels, spun his entire body, looked and was completely facing Trudeau, and just started in on this attack. But once he started having to defend himself and couldn't really just launch into attack, and he was on the defensive, he very much retreated within himself. And I thought that was really telling of how confident he is in his own platform. And that really bothers me, that a leader could be that dishonest. But that's... Have
you seen American politics? I don't know what to tell you,
man. Yeah, that's why I'm boring you with Canadian politics right now. So as much as I would love to continue breaking down the debate, I'm going to try to highlight just a couple of the key points that I think, or some of the key questions that I thought were a little more important to the debate, just because, you know, you got to go to bed, and I'm sure the listeners would like to move on to the next podcast. So there was a section on the next section after leadership was about polarization, human rights, immigration. And the question that I want to narrow in on there is they're talking about Bill 21, which I described to you before. Now, as mentioned, Jagmeet Singh is Sikh. He's of Punjab descent. He wears a turban. He actually made a joke because there was a slip of the tongue on the moderator's part that called Sher Singh, and Singh took him. He played it up really well. He said, "Come on, guys! I even wore the orange turban so I'd stand out today. Like, what do I have to do to look different than these people?" And it was hilarious. And he handled it so well. And he actually has a history of handling things very well. There's a video of him handling a heckler who's, you know, calling him Islamic and whatnot. And he's telling his people, stand down. I want this person to speak. I want this person to feel that they're being heard. And he talks to her and he engages with her. And it's really touching to see. And it ended up being a very popular video. A little bit of his background is, you know, as I said, his descent, he's Sikh. He's had to face racism and discrimination his whole life. So they directed the question about Bill 21 to him, saying, you know, like, as prime minister, would you stand back and allow another province to discriminate against citizens? Now, Singh said he does oppose laws like Bill 21. But my disappointing takeaway from this was he didn't really suggest any action. But what he did say, and I think, and being trying to be a little more woke here, so to speak, he did say that, you know, if tackling economic insecurity would help tackle these issues of polarization. So, for example, you know, there's the myth that immigrants are taking all our jobs, and that's very much a conservative talking plan saying to be anti-immigration. At this point, you know, Scheer was throwing more shade. He said his government would not pursue Bill 21 at a federal level. And there was a lot of talk about the difference about provincial jurisdiction. Most of the leaders really shied away from talking about interfering. They said, you know, we need to have these conversations, but we also need to respect autonomy and things like that. And there wasn't really a lot of action discussed there, and it kind of bothered me. But I mean, in the political game, I can kind of understand. Let's see here. Is there? So I'm just scrolling through because I didn't highlight this. I thought I might be able to get through it a lot quicker. So later on, there was a section about affordability, and there was a lot of talk about the budget, because obviously, you know, when you talk about putting money into services, the big fear is taxes. Wow, you are whiter than I am.
Taxes are always a big discussion in politics. They really are. And it's kind of funny because if they aren't the biggest discussion in Canadian politics, then the question is, are you really just discussing maple syrup and honey? Like, is that what it is? Like, is it maple syrup, honey, and whether we can politely say to go fuck yourself? I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of. So on the topic of balancing the budget and ways of reducing household debt for the average Canadian, there from Elizabeth May, she wanted to go after where finances are hidden. She doesn't want to make cuts. She wants to go after things like offshore revenues, financial transaction tax, which I'm not 100% sure on. I may put question marks after that. I meant to look at that. Obviously, I didn't. And then there was talk about a 1%er tax. Now, what this means is that individuals with $20 million or more in wealth have an even higher tax grade. She also paraphrased that, or to paraphrase what she said to Bernier, was, you know, trickle down economics don't work. Giving tax breaks to the extraordinarily wealthy does not work.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Because while, you know, Trudeau, Singh, and May are all talking about, you know, lowering taxes for the lower classes, increasing taxes for the upper class, Scheer and Bernier really harped on, no, everybody gets a tax cut. Everybody's going to get a break, blah, blah, blah. But when called on how they would do that, Bernier just said they would balance the budget in 2 years. He never said how he would do it, other than saying something about cutting corporate welfare. Scheer kept saying things like, he wants to leave more money in the pockets of Canadians so they can get so they can get ahead, which has been a conservative talking point for a long time. And to me, it's such a broken record. He's saying, something about leaving. This was actually an important thing that I did feel the need to bring up, is he said, $850 in the pockets of the average Canadian. And the reason why I'm highlighting that is because a while back, during Trump's tax cuts, there was talk about the average American getting $4,000 in tax cuts.
That's what they claimed, yes.
Right. The claim was that the average, but there was a lot of discussion about, well, average just means, the total amount of savings spread across everybody, as opposed to focusing on, well, where is that money really going? Who's really saving the most? So
because we didn't see, my family didn't see $4,000 at all. We did.
Right. And you're pretty representative of, say, like the average American. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, probably. I'm low middle class. I'm on the very low end of that middle class tier.
Right. So that's the difference of taking an average tax break and looking at the median tax break and seeing which people would really be making the biggest benefits. And one of the things that Trudeau brought up with the tax plan that Scheer had mentioned was that Trudeau said, under your plan, you will give tax cuts to people that will basically save them $50,000 a year, but that amount of money will only be going to the extraordinarily wealthy. $50,000 a year is more than the average Canadian makes before taxes.
All right, so I'm over that then, I guess.
Yeah. So Trudeau called that out about Scheer's little idea. The one thing that Scheer kept saying was that there would be a cut of Canada's foreign aid budget by about 25%. And he said, quote, "Stop sending money to the relatively well-off countries." Trudeau actually had, you could hear him talk. They'd cut off his mic, but you could hear it get picked up by Scheer's mic. And Trudeau was like, "Relatively well-off? Seriously?" And I was just like, oh, crap. But anyways, to continue in what Scheer said, he goes, "We're going to bring that home so Canadians can get ahead." And those words really start to grate on my nerves. He said, "I believe it's time that Canadians got a break. It's not greedy to put money in the pockets of Canadians." Yeah. And one last low comment on this thing was, Singh was saying insurance lobbyists don't want the universal single-payer health care, dental care, and pharmacare. Pharmacare, which is a strong thing that Singh is running on here. Let's see, scrolly, so I can get. I think there was one big point that I really wanted to make, and I wish I could remember what it was, because I think it was really important.
Well, I think if you look at all the points and you add them up together, I mean, you can look at the difference between each one of the candidates, and I think the big contrast between all the candidates here, Keith, is that you have the majority of your candidates are middle of the road to progressive. Like your country has moved farther progressive, and it's kind of funny because you're complaining about your conservatives, but your conservatives are like neocons to us. Like it's the Hillarys of the world, and I'll be honest, if that's the worst America ever has to deal with, period, I'm sorry. Like I'll accept the neocons being the conservative party if we can start eliminating some of these extremists. And I don't dislike libertarians. I don't dislike the Libertarian Party, but I'm more for the libertarian anarchists than I am for the libertarian conservatives, just because of the fact that the anarchists are willing to compromise as well as destroy society. And that's kind of where I fit into that boat. Like if we need to destroy society, that's what we need to do. But when you look at Canadian politics, you all are saying, let's be nice to each other, but fuck you, buddy. But at the exact same time, like your worst candidate is on the conservative Democratic side. So like, I know it's kind of funny because you're complaining and you're worried, man. You're worried about what could happen to Canada and how you could get a split vote and all these different things. But what you don't understand is that your worst is probably America's best. So like, at least be proud of that, man. At least be proud of that.
I don't want to give Scheer that much credit. Unfortunately, I didn't get to dig quite as deep as I had hoped. Admittedly, no, it's nowhere near as bad as Trump, although Bernier does get really close in terms of isolationist policies and just, cutting off everything.
Yeah, but do you honestly see him as a big contender, though?
Oh, no. Bernier is not a contender at all. And he just is one of the more obnoxious voices.
Yeah, but which is okay, though. Like, let him bring the crowds in. Just don't let him become prime minister, man. Don't let another Trump in office.
Yeah, that's true. So just to wrap that up, I'm gonna give you a quick Keith summary of each leader's performance, or their main argument. Trudeau, blah blah blah. Canadians are great, and more words, because Trudeau he used a lot of talk, a lot of flowery language. He is a career not career politician, but he is very much a politician in the sense that he knows that, just flowery language, sentiments, that's great. Scheer's main arguments. Trudeau is a poopy face. Mic drop, smirk at camera. I'm not even kidding.
I want a meme with that. That's meme worthy right there.
I'll make one just for you. Then you can share it with all the listeners. Singh, I summed him up as wealthy people aren't paying enough in taxes. The fuck is up with that? May, I did support a lot of what she was saying, but ultimately I had to sum her up as being, I'm woke, I spoke, get used to it. With Blanchette, the Parti Québécois, because he acknowledged that he's not going to be prime minister, he basically stood on, that's it.
Is he like the Garrisons of the world? A little bit. No?
Garrisons? Is it from South Park?
This is a South Park reference.
Oh, no, not quite. He doesn't get nearly as angry.
Fair enough.
And then to sum up Maxime Bernier, don't you dare take the things I say literally. I only meant to sound like I said those things so we could talk and have an honest discussion about how I'm not as bad as the things I said make me sound. And I'm not even kidding you. He kept getting called on it. He's like, well, we're the only ones who want to have an honest discussion. And I thought about, I could have invented 3 or 4 different drinking games just off of this debate, and you would die from each of them. If you took a drink every time Scheer attacked Trudeau, you would be dead after the first 45 minutes. Every time Bernier said, we are the only party in the interests of Canada, you'd be dead after about an hour and a half max, if you're really seasoned at drinking.
Maybe. You never know.
And yeah.
You never drank with me, man.
No, 16-year-old me was a very heavy drinker. Not so much anymore, though.
All right, fair enough.
So it was kind of disappointing, but at the same time, there were a few mic drops that it was worth the watch.
I'd agree. And I think as we wrap the show up, right, the best part about this whole thing is we look at Canadian politics and we look at American politics, and we can laugh at American politics all we want, but really in Canada, you guys are going through a very similar phase.
Yep. And
the difference is maybe your worst candidate is our best candidate. And I don't know, man. I don't know. Thank you. It's been a pleasure actually going through Canadian politics. So it was exciting tonight. I'm excited to talk about the results here next week, and I'm nervous. Thank you so much. So thank you all for joining Canada. Us. Go out and vote, Canada. If you're in Canada, I'm not in Canada, but I'm going to cast my vote illegally. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us tonight on another amazing Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with another episode. right here, hopefully with a better microphone than I had tonight. Thank you all and have a good night.